Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. We're gonna talk about expression maps and playback techniques in Dorico. Now, this is a big subject. There's a lot to talk about. We're not gonna talk about it all right now because I have things to do, but we're gonna focus on some basics of you want to, input a note in Dorico and you want a sound to come out. So there's some basic things that we need to understand about how Dorico works with sounds, VSTs, virtual instruments, and MIDI. And this right now, what we're going to talk about has to do with melodic instruments. We're not talking about percussion because that's a different rabbit hole. So we will look at that, but right now, let's just talk about some basics. We're going to use a VST and I'm going to show you that, but yeah, here's the basics, right? So when you open up Dorico, you're probably using Iconica Sketch or some Hallian sound from Steinberg. And so when you load up your orchestra piece, in this instance, what we're going to be talking about today is a string orchestra piece. So you load that up and it's auto-loading those playback templates. We're not going to get fully into that today, but it's going to load those so you have all sorts of sounds that you can use when you put a pizzicato on a string. It uses a pizzicato. That's what you're hearing. There's all sorts of things that have been set up in advance for that to work. Now, if you want to use a different virtual instrument, like let's say a Spitfire library, today we're going to use the free BBC Discover library because it's a great one just to kind of show how this works. That is a different process, and that's what we're going to get into with expression maps. But real quick, let's talk about some, again, basics with play mode and understanding the sound world of Dorico. Now here we are in a beautiful Dorico project that I have, and this is such a big topic. First thing we want to talk about here, let's go to play mode, right? You should already be familiar with this, but we have play mode. You can see I already have like some notes in here that we're going to talk about, but in play mode here, there's all sorts of things that can happen. If you wanted to mess around with the tempo map, right? If you have this not at the mixer, if you have this at kind of the, I don't know what, I'm sure there's some specific name for whatever this is called, but you know what I'm looking at. Here we are seeing the tempo line right there. If we wanted to change the tempo at some point, we could do that. We could make it a gradual step as well. So these are all the ways, and you can see it's reflected up there. So we can see a tempo map, really helpful. We'll dive into that more later. Here, as we click on our violin, you can see where we have our notes, and they are represented with their velocity here. Click back to this selection tool, and I could increase the velocity, I could lower it. And in this instance, it's going to have to do with our volume. Now, a few key things to always remember. MIDI, even the fanciest virtual instruments are fake. I guess they were real instruments that were recorded. There's nothing, I'm not opposed to that, but when you put together a big orchestra piece in Dorico and you're hearing all that playback, it's being mixed. And so it may not be representative of what a real ensemble sounds like. For example, sometimes I find that the violins are way too loud in the Iconica Sketch. And so you can adjust this. You can do some sort of gain staging you want to do in the mixer. But it's important to note that as you're using velocity for certain instruments, and VSTs are all created unequal. They are very different from company to company. So you'll have to kind of deal with this on your own with specific companies, whether it's Spitfire, Cinesamples, Orchestral Tools, Berlin, whatever. Some things function differently. And by that, I mean, is the volume going to be impacted by dynamics? Is it going to be impacted by expression, CC11? Is it going to be impacted by the mod wheel, velocity, CC1? If all of these things that I'm saying right now are confusing, go learn what those are, because that's really important to understanding how these sounds are being triggered for your VST. And down here, we can see that it's showing the playback techniques. So if we look in write mode, this is kind of regular. We have a pizzicato, an arco, and a tremolo. And here it's showing, we're looking at number 1, violin 2. It'll show that once we get there. But here you can see it's showing the staccato there because it's a short note. You're able to change what you're looking at here. You know, if you're dealing with pitch bend, if you are dealing with the dynamics, tempo changes, like I was saying, like these maps here are important for you to see and understand. They're definitely going to impact the play quality of your instruments. We'll get into that in a different video, but it's just an important thing to understand in this. Now you also have your mixer, right? Like I was saying, you have your inserts. If you're adding any reverb, there's like its built-in reverb. It's nice to turn this down. And then your master over here. Basics of just controlling all this, right? Now we'll talk about effects and some of these other things like the live stage. So where are your instruments coming in the spectrum of left to right? Right now, this is how it has it. This is kind of like a standard orchestra look. But if you were doing some sort of different setup and you wanted the cello over here and the viola over here, whatever, I don't know. You could do that in this and it'll have some effect on your surround sound. Here, the live space, this has to do with reverb, right? And you can change the reverb, the effects that you want in here. This is also, yeah, we're gonna discard this. All this is also able to be found when you're here under the play menu for stage template and space template. Yeah, whoa, that's a lot right there, but those are just some of the basics of the play mode. If you've not seen my video where I go through each mode of Dorico, check that out. I think that's really useful in explaining some of this too. But again, we're gonna focus a little bit more on how you change sounds. One more thing, let's go to preferences. So if you're on a PC, you're gonna go to edit, then preferences. If you're on a Mac, it's the Dorico preferences. So up here, we're going to File, and then we're gonna go over to Edit and Preferences. So under Play, there's all sorts of options that you have that you should check out, you should learn about. Do you want the playhead to follow? Do you want it to do different things? Do you want to change the default output level? Some people complain that Dorico's too quiet on their system. Maybe it's at 0 or maybe it's louder, I don't know. You can set it here and this will be kind of a default for your system. If you have MIDI input devices, I have MIDI keyboards. Right now it's not on because I'm not using it, but I could have it here and see that. We can deal with quantization, recording, all these things. Again, this is some stuff that we'll jump at later on after we get through some things. These are important to know about for how you can impact the sound quality for Dorico. Playback templates. This is not something we'll fully jump into today, but let's talk about how things work, all right? So we have notation here, and this is a playing technique, and the playing technique will impact a playback technique, which will trigger a sound in our VST. And all of this is organized within our expression map. So the playing technique, like pizzicato or arco or tremolo, those are notation. Playback technique, that's a sound. And it's important to understand those differences because when you look down at this library where you have playing techniques and then you have playback techniques, and then playback options, they're kind of all over the place, and I really do think it would be better if they simplified this and put things together, but Dorico has its reasons. But let's get to it. The meat of what we're wanting to talk about today is how do I change the instrument from being maybe an Iconica sketch violin to using a Spitfire library violin. Okay, so first let's go get your Spitfire library. You can head over here to spitfireaudio.com, and of course I'll have this link in the description below. And here you can go through and get this library that we're gonna be working with today. And I'm choosing this just because it's free. You can choose whatever library you want and work side by side, but if you wanna work exactly with me, let's just work with something free for right now. So at this point, I assume you have it installed in your system and you understand how it works. So we're going to go back into Dorico and we're gonna change some sounds. So first, let's take a look at how we change the instrument. So we're gonna go to play, or to play mode, and we are going to select violin 2, because that's what I'm dealing with right now. Right now we have the Hallian sonic selected. If we hit edit, right, this will open up this menu which shows that these instruments are in here, right? You could change these. If you wanted to use a different instrument from their library, you could do that right over here, including the new etude elements. It has key switches and all sorts of things, but we're going to change. We're going to change it up. So if you have the track inspector open, that's right, you're going to go over to VST and MIDI. Now we're going to add an instrument, so plus, and how come there's no number 1? Number 1 is saved, preserved by Dorico for the click track, so the metronome. So you can't edit 1 anyways. So number 3, we're going to find an instrument to work with. Now I'm going to go to Spitfire Audio, and then BBC Symphony Orchestra. And that automatically opens it up for me. Cool. We'll close this for a second here. So if I was to go to these settings, there's all sorts of things. The port, this is important to know, and the channel, the MIDI channel. We'll deal with that a little bit more in the expression map, which will be changing. But this is a place where you can deal with these settings. So we're going to want to leave it where it is right now at 1-1. So we've added this instrument to the project, but we need to go back to Track Inspector and make sure it's selected here. So this is where port 1 and channel 1 are important, because we could have had another instrument perhaps here. We could have changed this to a different spot. We could change the number of MIDI channels, right? So it's important that after you load this in and you have it selected, after we deal with expression maps, that in your track, you have the correlating port and channel. So let's open this up here and take a look at BBC. So we have a pretty simple library. This is pretty common for how the Spitfire libraries look. We have a long, we have a spiccato, pizzicato, and then tremolos. Right? We also have some expression control here, right? That's dealing with the volume. We have the mod wheel, or I don't know, maybe they're different. You have the dynamics here. So you can see there's lots of changes that we can do for the orchestra. So what we're going to deal with now is how do we switch between a regular sound, or a long sound, a sustaining sound, a legato sound, to a pizzicato sound. Let's take a look here. And this is hidden in BBC, which is super annoying. But if you click this and drag, you'll see that these green come out here. These are making it, this is making so we can change where the key switches are. So I want to put them right here at the bottom. So it's at C, C sharp, D, and D sharp or E flat, right? And you can see as I click these, it changes which of the playing techniques is being used, all right? So let's go ahead and close this real quick. In my project here, we have a regular note, a pizzicato note, an arco, so back to regular, and then a tremolo. Now, if you heard that, there was no sound difference, and that's what we're gonna solve, right? So we need an expression map that will specify which playing technique is going to call which playback technique. So let's start with playing techniques. Now, if you wanted to add a new playing technique, let's get rid of these real quick. You could do this a couple different ways. We could open this menu over here on the side and go to the playing techniques, and under strings, we could add a pizzicato. And then over here, we could go back to our arco, right? That's what we want, so go back to normal. We could have also done this if we did Shift P with pits, and then Shift P for arco, right? These are the basics of how Dorico works, right? So what's happening inside these? Let's just go ahead and double click here, or you could single click, doesn't really matter. And we're gonna edit. I wanna see inside. So these are where you can edit playing techniques. Let's say you wanted to add a new technique, right? You could do that in here. You could duplicate one, or you could create a new one and call it something like slap. Let's say you wanna hit the actual instrument. Now, I don't have a specific sound for that in the library, but I could create this. And the nice thing about playing techniques in this way, is that there's a couple different great things we could do. So something like this, I don't necessarily have the sound to play back, but let's add a note here. We're going to put it down here, and we're going to call it slap. Shift P, and then you can see I have slap. And so I could have selected it here, but I put it in there. So instead of having to do Shift X and enter text, because let's say you have the player hitting the violin several times, and you don't want to have to do that over and over and over with different text, just create a playing technique, and then you can add that each time. Also, if we were to change anything with the playing technique, like for example, if we did change the sound, perhaps we would just want to hear something a little different as a cue to ourselves. Let's put in a pizzicato sound. So the playback technique here, right, that's the sound, that's not the playing technique, is the notation. The playback technique is what we'll hear. Let's put in pizzicato. All right, so we have that there. And it's going to go ahead and do that for us once we enable it all. Cool. Something else that'll be nice for this, just to make it really clear, let's change the note head. Right-clicking, we're gonna go to note head, and then let's give it a cross, just an X note head, like that, right? Now, if you can hear that, this is still a regular note. We haven't changed anything to do with the playback. So those are our playing techniques. So now let's check out playback techniques. Under library, we're gonna go to playback techniques. And this is where we can see and edit some of these techniques. So we're gonna go back down. Let's find slap real quick. PQRS, all right, slap. So an alias for if there was another one. So if you had something else and you wanted this to also be called, you could do that. You could add it to a grouping. Is this a dynamic? Maybe you're gonna create 5 Fs, 5 fortissimo, so it's fortissimo, something like that, right? You could create that as a dynamic if this wanted to impact lengths or ornaments. What we're dealing with is techniques, but this is where you can change that. If it doesn't work, what's the fallback? We could set that here as well. Is there an articulation type, direction, or is it an attribute? So let's go back to the track here, our violin 2. And we could hit edit here. We could have also gone over here and hit edit, but we're gonna deal with this one. E for edit. So these are the notes that we need to remember. C, C sharp, D, D sharp. All right, so let's go ahead and set these up in the expression map. So this expression map, it has this at default, and there's all sorts of others that have already been made. We're gonna make a new one. So I could have had this drop down, otherwise we can hit this arrow to open it up. And it shows that same list, but this is how we're gonna create a new one. So let's hit the plus, and we're gonna call this Spitfire BBC Orchestra, and this is for violin. So I'm gonna put violin, and there's all this other information you could put in. Maybe you wanna put in me. You could say like and subscribe. What plugin is this? This is the BBC Discover, or actually we'll even call it Spitfire Audio BBC Discover. All right, and that's the plugin that we're dealing with. Now, do we want to allow more than one note to be played at the same pitch? Now this is where we get into the hairiness of VSTs. Some VSTs are more complicated than others. So some can allow you to do multiple techniques at the same time, or they layer them. So is that something you want to do? Or is it more simple and you don't have to deal with that? But it's important to understand that. Also, if your library has specialty techniques that you'll want to load in separately, like battuta or ponticello, things like that, again, you'll want to note that differently, and I think it's important to keep that information in your notes. Do you want this to apply stage template settings, or are you dealing with your own panning and stuff like that in the plugin itself? So we've been going for a bit, and we're only just getting to expression maps. This is a deep rabbit hole, and this is a slow process. There are already templates made. You can find those, I have the description below, but there are playback templates made for Dorico with all sorts of different instruments. There's also different companies or folks that have made their own for Dorico. So you can find and download those or share them with your friends. All the more reason to include all that information in your expression maps for when you share them. So, expression maps. This is the big thing. So, they're basically for how sounds are organized within Dorico. And another thing I forgot to mention, that if you have a zillion of these and you want to just find what's being used in this template, you could filter, and that helps too. This nice filter button. And this is all over Dorico. It's a very useful little button. All right, so let's get to this. We have the init. What is that? So by default with MIDI, this is like the bass sound that's going to exist. I'm not putting anything in here, but it sets it up as a default. So this is a switch that once playback starts, that it will use this as the default sound. So for strings, you'd probably want ord, ordinario, or legato. Bass. Now these are your basic sounds that we're going to trigger. Now a bass technique here, it's going to overwrite anything before it. So it's like talking about pizzicato goes, and then you have arco, and now we're arco until we do something different again, right? Like it's kind of key switch, it's gonna stay there. Right, so these are mutually exclusive. Pizzicato or arco, something like that, right? Not all at the same time. Now you have add-ons as well, which is this button right down here, where you could add something that is in addition to. So this doesn't overwrite what playback you recently had, it's just adding an additional sound on top of it. So in this video, we'll be dealing with bass sounds. Middle C. Where is middle C? So this again is different from VST to VST. Some are using middle C on C4 or C5 or C3. So it really depends on the instrument that you're working with, and you'll have to figure that out on where it should think of as middle C. But the MIDI note would be 60, 60. So now in here, you would have your actions. So let's go ahead and add a bass technique. We're gonna add pizzicato. You can see it already has that there. Very helpful because of playing techniques, right? So if you were adding some crazy technique that you have in your VST and you don't see in the drop-down menu the kind of name that you want, you need to create that playing technique first, and then it'll exist. We now have pizzicato in here, and now we need to add a way to make the sound, way to get that. In these actions, this is the action that's going to cause the new sound. You could have a CC message or a control change, and you could set your CC here. You could have a program change, right? So let's say it's in program 1, and that's what's gonna change the sound. You could also do a key switch. So a key switch is like that keyboard that we saw with Spitfire, where if you hit C0, it's gonna be one sound, D sharp, it's a different sound. So that's a key switch. You could also do an absolute channel switch, right? So this is where it's gonna change the channel to something like 4 or 2. Now, where is this gonna come into play? Again, I think if you're using more complicated instruments, especially in Contact. Let's take a look. Let's click on the cello here, and we're going to go to VST. We're going to add a new device, and let's go ahead to Native Instruments and add in Contact 8. So we have Contact here, and if you're familiar with Contact, there's lots that we can do. So let's find my solo cello. Where is that? Solo strings, here we go. And we're going to add true legato. So I've double clicked that, and here we go. We have this at MIDI channel. We're gonna change this to 1. And now let's say I wanted another cello sound. So let's add a second one. Let's add cello articulations. So now we have this, and we're gonna put this at channel 2. So what if we wanted to switch back and forth between these two different sound libraries within the same Contact instance? Well, that's where our expression map comes in. So heading back over here, just to show you again, if we open this, we see the key switches, but in our BBC library, where I was showing this, that channel switch, that absolute, so this is where you would change that for that Contact instrument to go from channel 2 or channel 1, not key switch like the Spitfire library. Now the last one is relative channel. So this relates to the original instrument that you have within like that contact instance where you have legato for 1, and then you have articulations for 2, and maybe you have multiple different articulations going 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So you could have here in your settings 1, and it'll just go up by 1 to change the channel. So you're not saying specifically go to channel 2, you're just saying go up 1 channel. And if you needed to go back to the original channel, you would just put in 0. Now that's a complicated array of actions, but they all do kind of have their purpose and place. I think for the most part, you'll be dealing with just doing a key switch. But again, if you're going to deal with some of the more complicated Spitfire or other libraries, you may want to do a CC change because that could be an easier way to navigate. But again, it just depends on what you're doing and what your goal is. Now let's get rid of all this nonsense because we don't need any of it. You could make it change the octaves if you need. You could also duplicate. So let's say we had a key switch and then you wanted to duplicate that. You could, all sorts of different things, move it up or down, whatever. All these different things that we can do. Over here on the right, you could change the transposition. You could change a delay. Again, some instruments may behave differently and you may want a delay for the sound. You could deal with that right here in Dorico. And then we have volume dynamic. So for something like pizzicato, which let's find out what that's gonna be. So we're going to discard these changes. Let's go and open our instrument, the BBC Orchestra. Pizzicato is this, D0. So let's go ahead and change that. We're gonna open the expression map. We're going to, we're in the wrong one. Go down here to BBC. We're gonna grab our pizzicato here, get rid of these. And we're gonna change this to D0. And now with a pizzicato, the volume would be with velocity. So with velocity, and again, this is different with different instruments because it's different with cinesamples than it is with other libraries, but velocity will often be the volume or how hard the instrument hits. Now, if you have something like a legato or a sustain or a long note, you may want to change that with the mod wheel so that you can have a gradual change. A pizzicato is just a single attack, and usually those are with velocity, similar to a accent or a spiccato. So for this, we're going to keep it at the velocity. But again, if it's a long note, you'd probably want to set that to the control change over time from 1 to 127. And you could change that right here, CC1, and then it'll change that there. You could have a secondary dynamic if you needed that. And then you could also have conditions. So let's just add a condition to see it. So note length is greater than or equal to medium. So there's a table in Dorico that explains what's a medium length or a short length or a very short. And I'll have that in the description below that you can see. But this is a condition. So if your note is very short, do you want it to call the spiccato sound instead of the staccato sound? Do you want it to do a long instead of a legato? And again, that depends on your VST library, but these are conditions that you can set to make it set that up and call that specific sound. That could be really useful if you want to like set that up and not have to think about it. If this is a situation where you're probably going to live orchestra anyways and you don't really need to worry about the quality of sound, then you may not get into this depth, but you could set it up, leave it, save it as a template that you're always loading up, and then you'll have these for callback later. All right, so that's just the bass and add-on switches. Now we're in the playback options and overrides. These are just a lot of options that are going to be very specific for you and what you do. So go through these, check them out. Do you want to change the legato note duration? Do you want to change the dynamic curve? All of this is unique to you and what you want to do. Going on down, we have mutually exclusion groups. This is basically deciding that like what things are exclusive of each other and cannot happen at the same time. For example, can pizzicato and sustain happen at the same time from the same player? I don't know. There'll be a default setup for this. I haven't had to really deal with this, but you could deal with this, and that's what this is for. And if you go to the Dorico manual or the forums, there's not very much about this. I don't think it's very clear, but maybe they'll dive in deeper to this later on. So let's get back to adding more sounds. So we have our pizzicato sound here, which is D0. We need to add our regular sound, which was C0. So let's go ahead and add that one in. And then let's hit OK. So we now have an expression map. We need to make sure that it has been selected for our instrument. So over here in expression map for our instrument, we will select the Spitfire BBC Orchestra violin. We have our notes here in violin 2. And this is showing a pizzicato. This is a pizzicato. This is a pizzicato. They're all pizzicatos for some reason. And that's not what we want, because this should be an arco or a regular sound, an ordinario. So let's see what's wrong. So I think what I got wrong was the number. So we're going to set this to D1 and try that again. All right, so we had a pizzicato sound here, and we even had a pizzicato sound here. Let's go ahead and update some things. Let's also add our tremolo. So we're going to add a note. So trem, we're going to get a new action here. We have a new bass, and let's add another key switch. This one was D sharp 1. And we're gonna make this a control change. So now we have 3 different sounds. Let's also go ahead and add our staccato. Why not? I think it was a staccato, or maybe it was spiccato, but we'll just put staccato for now. And this was C sharp 1. All right, so now if we go in here, let's add, I don't think we have a staccato note, so we'll do that and add a little note there, a dot. So let's see, how does it work? So hopefully you could hear that big difference. This was shorter. This, even though it's slap, is using the default sound of the pizzicato. Our pizzicato sounded like a pizz, and our arco was an arco. And now that you've saved this, you could export it and then import it into other projects. So you have the BBC Symphony Orchestra, that ready to go all the time. You could even save that to be a playback template that you always load in. And you can create tons of these expression maps for all of your different instruments and load them in. It's a nice time saver. Obviously, you don't want to have to do this every time you have a project, but this is how you can start learning about how to use those VSTs that you have for a better sound quality with your orchestra. Now, remember that this may eat up some RAM and some CPU, so be careful if you're doing a huge orchestra piece. If you're starting to experience some slowdowns, it could be because of the VSTs that you're running simultaneously. But again, that'll be a unique situation for what you're dealing with and what your computer is. Now, also in here in our track inspector, you have other effects if you needed to add them, or channel, like your channel strip, for if you wanted to change the panning of where it's at or the volume of it. So now if we open this up, you can see here we have this as one of our drop-down, right? Because we've already saved it and it's in here. Once we created it, it was in there. And this is a faster way to assign all of these different instruments that you may have. Let's say you have a full orchestra. You can assign them this and not have to go between each track and then open this and select, or use the drop down here. So the endpoint just makes it a little bit faster to set up all of your different instruments with their specific expression map. Now, this is a big topic. This was a lot to cover as fast as I could. So if you have questions, be sure to throw those down in the comments below. But we're gonna do more about playback templates, playback techniques, expression maps, and what we didn't talk about today, which was percussion, because that's handled differently. So be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you can check out those videos as well. Hopefully you learned something today, and you can like this video, subscribe to the channel, because it helps me out and helps us make more of these videos just for you. So let me know what questions you have for Dorico, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So thanks for checking out this video, and I'll see you next time.